So this session today, this afternoon, will be moderated by Abhay Raman, who's Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer with Sun Life Insurance, a senior executive with over 20 years of global experience in various industries. He speaks frequently on topics related to cybersecurity and AI. Abhay, over to you.
Well, thank you. Hopefully this works. First of all, thank you for the opportunity, and I think this conversation is going to be very interesting because it's relevant to all of us, and it's relevant to our what we see our kids do, and so on and so forth as well. You know, by way of, I'll set some context, and then we can get into the discussion. In 2022, the Financial Industry Forum on AI, which is fondly known as FIFAI, had their first, sort of was convened by OSFI and the Global Risk Institute, and it's largely to promote the use of AI in Canada's financial sector. And in this space was the collaboration of AI experts from industry, academia, government, and so on. So they got together, had a nice little talk, and then came up with a report called the Canadian Perspective on Responsible AI. And where they outlined 4 principles, edge principles. One is explainability, which I think we're still working on in terms of AI. Data, which I think we can all understand a little better than explainability. Governance, which I think is incredibly different wherever you go. And ethics, which is a judgment call by depending on who you talk to, right? But I think these are very important principles when we look at the use of AI in financial institutions, when we look at the AI in critical industries, and so on and so forth. So then, in the May of this year, they got together again, along with the Department of Finance, and had their second workshop, FIFAI 2. And it's part of one of 4 workshops, and this one, really, the first session examined, rightfully so, because I'm the Chief Security Officer, examined issues of security, general security, safety, cybersecurity, and subsequent workshops are going to look at sort of financial crime, consumer protection, financial stability. What I find most, in my life, what I find most fascinating about AI is you can come up with new exploits which are so much faster, so much better automated, and cheaper to deploy than having people actually come up with this stuff. So when you look at AI, it's worrisome at times. So we're very fortunate to have with us 3 participants from the May workshop. And Gerard McDonald is an executive consultant with GRI. He has over 20 years of financial services experience. He was the Vice President of Risk and Compliance at BMO. And he's been instrumental at GRI's work with OSFI and other government agencies in this space. Matt Glavota, Executive Director of Applied Research, Data and Analytics at OSFI, is leading the efforts to leverage data and advanced AI in this sector. And I think some of the work that you do is very fascinating because you have to have a deep understanding of AI to be able to affect regulatory decision making. So it'd be good to have that conversation. And you've had multiple senior roles at OSFI since 2009 and helped shaped both workshops and hopefully the workshops going forward as well. Alexey is a senior research associate at GRI, a strategic advisor, principal strategic advisor at Department of Finance, and he's a tenured professor at TMU, and brings a lot of experience with AI and its contribution and impact on systemic risk. And he has applied his passion for AI through playing a key role in both workshops and the workshops going forward. So we've got an esteemed panel here, and we can get right into the conversation. And I think there's a method by which you can put questions in, and I'll take them as we go along or towards the end. So first of all, Gerard, tell us a little bit about the genesis of FIFAI, sort of 1 and 2, and maybe summarize the workshop on cybersecurity.
Sure. Thanks, Abhay. And I would like to compliment all of you for picking what's obviously going to be the best workshop. And I don't imagine it's just because, you know, you didn't actually want to get up and walk somewhere. And I'll also start off in a slightly daring way by speaking for my OSFI colleague, which in general, I think, as many of you know, is generally not a very good idea. But I think I'm on pretty safe ground here. And so to go back to Abhay's question, I think one of the reasons we were so excited about FIFAI 2 was that FIFAI 1 was so successful. We had a bunch of really great conversations. We came up with the edge principles that Abhay talked about. And I think both OSFI and GRI were very excited about the results and the discussion that it engaged. However, as our esteemed CROs, particularly David and Kelly, talked about today, there's no rest for the wicked. AI continues to move at an incredible pace. And so there was no kind of stopping at FIFAI 1. We had to do FIFAI 2 as well. OSFI was excited about it. We were excited about it. And we also had Finance Canada come very early to the table. But we were even more excited because we had other regulators as well. So as Sonia was saying earlier in her introduction, FCAC and FinTrack are also on board this time as well. And we're covering a broader range of ideas this time around. And so, as Abhay said, this time around there are 4 workshops. So the first one was security and cybersecurity, which we did on May 28th, sponsored by GRI, OSFI, and Finance Canada. And then we're holding 3 additional workshops. On October 1st, we're doing financial crime, co-sponsored by GRI and FinTrack. On October 29th, we're doing financial stability in AI, co-sponsored again with OSFI and Finance Canada and GRI. And then on November 13th, we're doing consumer protection and AI, co-sponsored with FCAC. And and then each workshop is producing an interim report, and then we'll also do a comprehensive final report as well. And in that first workshop, we had 56 Canadian and American AI experts from the full range of Canadian financial institutions, as well as academia, the technology providers, as well as a broad range of regulators and government folks as well. And we identified kind of 4 different areas that we thought were critical threats. And I'm sure as we go through this discussion, we'll talk more about those. And in the CRO discussion as well, they brought up a bunch of these issues as well. So the first one was social engineering and synthetic identity fraud. The second one was AI cyber attacks. The third one was the third party and supply chain for AI. And the fourth one was AI data vulnerabilities. And we sort of explored them in a bit more detail, talked about what some of the opportunities are, what some of the mitigants are, but also some of the potential opportunities as well. And so it was a great partnership between ourselves, OSFI, and Finance Canada. But again, at the end of the day, it's sort of the folks in this room and folks like them who kind of are part of the industry and are experts in this area that kind of led to some really robust discussions and interesting ideas, which we will explore further in our final report, which probably come out early in the new year after we finish the other workshops.
So, before we move on to Matt for another sort of context-setting question, I had one question for you, which is, because AI is going to move so quickly, what is the process of evolution after the 4 workshops? Are we planning on having something on a regular basis so we can evolve the initial thinking? What's that process going to look like? Have you given that some thought?
So it's interesting when Sonia talked, she talked about how kind of it's almost like science fiction. And the one thing I've done is set up a science fiction book club with some of my other friends. My kids who are 19 and 21 tell me I actually shouldn't tell people that I'm actually pretty uncool already. And when I mention that, they just think I'm even more uncool, which probably is accurate. But on a more serious note, I think there'll be a real push for for that final report. And what I would say is the interim report, and the first one is already on our website for security and cybersecurity. And it's a bit of, it's kind of like minutes, right? It kind of talks about what did we talk about, what did we learn. What we really want to do with the final report is develop the thinking, to really push the envelope in terms of kind of what else is going on in the world, what's going on around the world, what are the real mitigants, and then what are the real opportunities, and delve into a little bit of detail. Now, we'll obviously be leaning very hard on our partners across the regulatory landscape and the federal government to kind of think about, kind of to really come up with recommendations about kind of what the industry should do. Because I think the real key thing is, you know, GRI has been known as a great convener, and I think the fact that we've gotten all of you into a room today shows one of our real powers, the secret sauce of what we do is we're able to bring, you know, regulators and government and policymakers and academics and industry in a room together to have robust conversations. You know, not necessarily, and not, you know, nothing personal to my friends at OSFI, but in my 20 years at BMO, the conversations with OSFI were a bit more fraught, intended to be more around examinations and examination results. One of the nice things about the summit today and these workshops is that it's not about, you know, coming up with a regulatory guideline. It's about where are we? What do we think the important issues are? Where do we think we go next? And so I think that's what I'd really love to come out of this is that final report becomes a roadmap to what comes next. And you know, the reality is I think AI just continues to accelerate. And so will there be a FIFAI 3? I don't want to put words in Sonia's mouth or the board's mouth, but at the end of the day, I think this is an issue that I think is not going to go away and will require more work.
Yeah, totally agree. And you know, we keep that conversation going. But moving on, Matt, why was OSFI's interest in continuing the workshops, and why choose security as the first one?
Sure, it's a great question, and I think I'll take the second part first because it leads into the first. And so the reason we chose cyber, I mean, it wasn't just us. We consulted with our partners, and I think there was a general consensus that people wanted to speak about cyber first. From our perspective, from my perspective, it's the urgency. I think this is the area that is probably the most urgent, where we see the quickest transition to problems that could evolve. And so when you're looking at opportunities, issues, concerns that exist in the AI space, this particular area seems to come up the most. And there's a number of reasons for that. I think that the speed, as was mentioned earlier, of the development of the technology is critical. I think the one thing that AI does around cyber is it really lowers the bar for entry for bad actors. And that is a big concern for us. You know, it used to be you had to have some knowledge. You had to be able to code. You had to understand, you know, cyber crime. You had to have a certain skill set. Now, you go on the dark web and somebody's selling something for $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, depending on what you want to buy, and you can go be a cyber criminal. So that lowered barrier to entry is problematic. On top of that, the world is much more plugged in these days and reliant on, especially these days as more institutions move to the cloud, as there's more third parties that come in and help you do the business that you need to do, AI kind of accelerates a lot of the problems that you can have. And so I think that's the reason that we chose, if we're talking about AI, let's start with cyber, because it's probably the most urgent and the one that's on people's mind the most. Now, why then this type of forum? And it's clear that in this instance, a small version of the prisoner's dilemma, if we cooperate, we're all better off, right? And so if we can find ways to get beyond some of the limitations that we have, sharing information, exchanging ideas, et cetera, without giving up secret sauce, I think everybody in the room is better off, and it's easier to fight the bad actors. And you know, this sharing, certainly there's going to be challenges, but it's something that we're working on continuously. On top of that, you know, I think there's expertise in all areas, and you learn something from, you know, interesting from all facets, from private, from academia, from other regulators about how they're dealing with this issue. And I think that sharing of information, that sharing of expertise is really, it is critical to success here. And I think, so just to finish off, and to make my presentation a little more interesting, I think the biggest thing that we really do worry about as this technology starts to become a little more commonplace, as people get more comfortable with it, will eventually be the complacency that comes with that. And so I'm going to share two stories and sort of one thought about that. So I was at a conference recently, an academic conference, and they were talking about AI that had been built, and they programmed it and said, we want you to optimize return. We're going to give you a bunch of rules, SEC rules, other jurisdictional rules, and here's some money, and this is the program, and this is what we want you to do. So what does the AI do? The first thing it does, it starts to do insider trades and fraud. First things first, right? Which, you know, it's like, okay, hold on, you try to fix it, and da-da-da, and the programmers are trying to make adjustments. And I think the scarier thing was, it's human handlers saw it do it again, and they said, are you doing that? And the AI said, nope, nope, and it lied to its human handlers. So, you know, I mean, I was, you know, my background is currency and commodity trading, so I know algorithms, I know a bit of math, but I'm not really an AI technical expert in the ground. I'm more of an end user who wants to do my job more effectively. So this was a story to me that was really a bit eye-opening. Other one that I heard, same conference, was they programmed some AI to compete against humans, and it was almost a war game, but more of a war situation, and the goal was to go from point A to point X with a bunch of stops in between. And you're going across water and ocean, and the person or entity that wins is the one that gets to point X first. The first thing the AI did was sink half its ships, kill half its crews, because those were the slower ships, and of course it won. And the lesson here is, as a human being, there's certain parameters that you don't have to be told. Don't sink your own ships, don't kill your own people. AI is not governed by those particular constraints. So as we write these programs, as we try to regulate this sphere, when we start to think we understand, and it becomes, you know, we have to challenge ourselves with that concept. So the explainability and the ethical issues that were talked about earlier are very critical. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is a little, you know, different and scary, is just a comment. When I hear that AI is out there, and when they try to go from a version 1 to a version 2, some AI that's not enclosed will try to replicate itself and put itself somewhere else. So there's survival instinct in some AI that's built. I'm sure many of you already know this. But what that tells you is you've got a system that's been built that constantly corrects itself and changes what it's doing internally. The ability to predict what the outcomes are, it's challenging. And so the ability for us to maintain some sort of vigilance is going to be a bit of a challenge, because once you start to get comfortable with something, suddenly, you know, the things that can go wrong multiply a little bit. So I think as a regulator, that kind of explains why we're always worried about things. You hear stuff like that, and it's like, okay, we need solid rules, we need you folks to understand our expectations of you, et cetera. And so the only way we can do that is to have this kind of forum and have these kinds of discussions where, please ask me any questions you want. Not too hard, but fire away. And so this type of forum is very useful. And the material that we put out is very useful in helping folks have these discussions and set expectations.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. And I think it was a really good context. And I always thought so far that the reason they chose security was because that's the one thing that I was really interested in. Because in my role, continuing to freak you out as he started with, there's this AI piece of malware that we're tracking on our threat intel that literally goes and reconfigures itself against all controls that you put against it. So, you know, from a community standpoint, we're a little petrified about it. And you know, I think that's going to be the future of this sort of stuff. So the edge principles are super important in terms of what we need to do, and sort of addresses some of the other sort of examples that you did give. And this collaborative discussion is really the way to sort of move this forward. Alexey, I've been silent for this long. Why did the federal government decide to get involved as well? And what were you most interested in getting out of these workshops?
Thank you, Abhay. So every 5 to 7 years, the federal government reviews the financial sector. The review covers the laws, the policies, the rules that govern the sector. And the goal is simple. The goal is to make sure that the framework is up to date and ready for the future. So in August last year, we published a consultation paper where we highlighted the growing importance of artificial intelligence in financial services. And the paper raised questions about AI risks, opportunities, productivity gains, and system-wide impacts. So FIFAI is part of this effort, broader effort, and it helps us understand how AI is used in financial services. It brings in the views of regulators, tech providers, banks, civil society, and these views will help us shape our policy response. The success of FIFAI 1 showed the value of open cross-sector dialogue. In FIFAI 2, we wanted to explore emerging areas such as generative AI, agentic AI, as well as go broader in scope. So FIFAI 2 covers consumer protection areas, financial crime, financial stability, cybersecurity, national security. So this work is not happening in isolation. So we are coordinating with ISET, with Canadian AI Safety Institute, as well as internationally. As you know, Canada holds the G7 presidency this year, and AI is one of the central themes.
That's fascinating. You know, so we've got a little bit of context with respect to your interest in your collective interest in FIFAI and why we should continue to move this forward. What should industry take away from this process? And you know, now that we've have draft papers and so on, like what guidance would the three of you give industry and what we should do with this information? Maybe we start with Alexey and go this way then.
Yeah. So the report showed that AI is already changing the way cyber threats appear in financial services. So phishing, deepfakes, synthetic identity fraud, adversarial manipulations are all growing, and AI is powering or amplifying these threats. So what it also shows is that we're not talking about the future. So these events happening right now. So the example that I liked that one of the participants at the workshop shared is how North Korean residents secure jobs in North American companies. So once inside, they got access to internal systems and sensitive data was exposed. So something to, what we see here is the national security angle. So it's not just the IP issues. And another noteworthy taking from the workshop is, of course, the value of knowledge sharing. So when you get together policymakers, regulators, financial industry experts from other industries, you can have a more complete picture of where the risks are and what the good practices might look like. In regards to what the industry should do, so first of all, in my view, it should be take AI threats seriously. This common argument that AI is just another algorithm, although it's technically true, could be misleading. So yes, AI has been around since 1950s, but again, we did not see these capabilities a long time ago. So it's the capabilities that we see now that make a difference. The second point that I would like to highlight is review your risk management practices, internal risk management practices. So 60% of forum participants showed that the pace of the technology, AI technology, outpaces the risk management framework's adaptation. And don't just have controls, so measure time, because the time it now takes to identify, to verify, and to contain must be much smaller. So the time that it takes the time from the vulnerability is identified until the time that it is exploited by bad actors is now very small. So this must be taken into account. The central theme across like the forum was the third party. So yes, it's still an unsolved problem. This risk got elevated because of AI, but having a small must-have list for your AI vendors seems like a very good practice. Whether the models that you get from your third party had independent assessment, something to keep in mind. Supply chain visibility. Do you know the suppliers of your third party? And in general, clear rules for the data leaving your company. Do you know how this data is used? So these are all important considerations for third-party risk. And the next point is, again, keep sharing the knowledge. So because one of the values of Financial Industry Forum on AI is that we get together, we exchange ideas, and we learn from each other. And I would like, in this respect, I would like to emphasize the cross-industry collaboration, because the forum benefited a lot from the expertise that we got from tech providers. So things that they know, well, might be something that we're not aware of. So yeah, that would be like my biggest advice.
Matt?
Sure, so you're hired. I mean, everything you just said is exactly what OSFI would say as well. So that was I agree fully with everything that you just said. For me, I guess sticking with the theme of my prior comments, I think avoid complacency is probably the biggest thing. As we move further and people get more comfortable with the technology, it becomes problematic. I would say the skill set that's required to deal with this is not the skill set that's common today. So it's hard to find the skill set. So finding it, but also training folks so they're aware at least of some of the dangers is critical. So you got to get your staff, anybody who's in this milieu, they got to understand at least the risks that are out there and the risks that they are potentially unknowingly taking with data, with access to your systems, with all of those things. I think there's an element of education that needs to be taken up there. And I think, frankly, for the private sector, there's an element of consumer education that needs to be implemented that really is self-protection for you all, right? If the people that your customers understand the risks that they take when they do certain things, I think that also helps everybody. So it's a system, and you can't look at one part of the system as being separate from the others. So I think that's kind of critical. And just to emphasize the complacency point, one of the things that we haven't talked a ton about and didn't talk a ton about in the prior session was quantum. And what does that mean? And so I talked to PhDs, I talked to academics, I talked to a lot of smart people who work in cyber and work in AI. And I asked, do you understand the math? Do you understand how quantum works? And most of them are like, sort of. So think about the complexity and the difficulty of understanding AI and finding those skill sets. Quantum, when it comes online, is going to multiply that problem. And of course, AI and quantum are definitely, as was said earlier, accelerants here. So having a good governance structure, having an understanding of what you're willing to take on from a risk appetite standpoint, and then how you're going to govern that, and having a clear structure about what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, I think is critical for industry. So if you just take one thing out of this, it would be just avoid complacency, because this technology is moving fast, and it's difficult to stay on top of.
Gerard?
I think just two quick things for me, one a bit more meta, and then maybe one a bit more tactical. And the meta one is, I talked a bit about GRI's convening power and how these are open discussions. And one of the things I think is really fascinating is you can hear from other people in the industry the things that they're worried about. So being aware of that is critically important. And I did spend, as I think as Abe mentioned, 20 years at BMO, mainly in risk. And I would say hearing in an open conversation, a robust conversation, what the regulators and the government are thinking as well, like what are the issues they're concerned about, that's also incredibly valuable. So that kind of engagement and awareness, your ability to engage in the conversation, hear what others in the industry are saying, hear at the kind of foundation level, what regulators are worried about, I think helps you strategically think about your risk organization and how you're going to manage this going forward. And then more tactically, dig deeper into the risks that we identified. If they impact you on a day-to-day basis, think about the opportunities that we identified. Or is there a way that you can take advantage of those? And stay tuned for the final report. And if you really want to be comprehensive, then yes, set up your own science fiction book club based on AI novels.
So that's
Oh, sorry, by the way, you were supposed to laugh there in case you didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, we missed that part. From an industry perspective, what's fascinating about these sorts of reports and these sorts of things is, we leverage these sorts of reports to be able to get a view around, from a governance standpoint, how are we looking at specific things? When we look at the specifically the tactical types of things you see, like we see the real issues and we see the telemetry around it. What I find, is a problem today and probably going to continue to be a problem just purely from wearing my hat as a chief security officer is we don't have enough knowledge to be able to effectively investigate an AI issue. So if we, as a business or businesses, decide we're going to stitch together 3 or 4 different sort of AI models and have them sort of improve our business process and cut a whole bunch of other things loose, if we had an issue, the process to investigate it requires specialized knowledge, and your standard incident response teams don't have that capability. So, part of something that, I'm personally thinking about is to figure out how we can get these teams to sort of improve their knowledge, and I think that's something that's really important for us to think about. Otherwise, we just can't investigate these things. Anyway, so there's opportunities all around. Maybe to all 3 of you again, like, what was some of the insights or themes coming out of the first workshop that you actually think is the most interesting that we should continue to sort of pull the string on?
Quickly, for me, the one was it was about information sharing. One of the jobs I did at BMO is I was the head of recovery and resolution planning. That was when the first living wills came out. And it was a real challenge for the industry to create those because it was new, but it was also very high priority coming out of the global financial crisis. And one thing that I did is I actually pulled together my equivalent at the other 5 banks, and we actually sat down and we talked about it. And OSFI was aware, and they were comfortable with it. It's not a competitive thing, and it was something where there was real value for the industry, for the regulators, and for Canadians for us to get it right. And so I do think in this area as well, there's an opportunity for more information sharing. It can't be competitive information, obviously that goes without saying. And, you'd have to make sure all of the legal, the I's are crossed and the T's are dotted, or vice versa. And you'd have to make sure that everyone was comfortable. But there is this is like cyber attacks, for example. There is real value in having folks know what's going on, rather than kind of like a set of dominoes going down one by one. And so that's one I think that it's not nearly as simple as my recovery and resolution planning, because there's a lot more to it. But I think that one, kind of pushing the envelope on that one, working with our federal government colleagues and with OSFI to get a better sense of being able to quickly share some of that critical information, I think could go a long way to helping the industry and Canadians as well.
Sure, yeah. I would echo that. I was not surprised, but the vehemence and the intensity of people saying we got to find ways to get folks together and to share information. Anonymized, of course, no secret sauce, but getting people together to share information to help them. And in essence, the other thing that I was going to say is to fight fire with fire, in essence, because this technology, yes, there's some threats and there's some issues, but it's also an opportunity, right? There's a lot of opportunities here, and we can't lose sight of that, and you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'll stop with the platitudes, but you do have to, in some instances, as was said earlier, this is at the speed of machine. This is not at the speed of human, and so you need to have the right instruments in the right environment to be able to deal with some of these things. And to your point, it is needle in a haystack stuff for human beings to try to deal with this, and for folks who don't really understand some of the underlying technology. So it's a challenge, and I think finding the right balance of information sharing, of using the correct technology in the right way to fight this stuff, I think that clearly came out of that first session, and I thought a lot of people were very interested in finding ways to do that and overcoming some of the hurdles that you get. I mean, it's just really the mentality I think we all have to have is, it's an interesting problem. How do we solve that problem? Rather than, I can't do that. And so when you have that mentality, I think, folks can help themselves in the right way without sort of inhibiting their competitiveness.
Alexey?
Yes, to me the biggest takeaway is that AI is not just scaling cyber threats, it's speeding them up, it's making them personal and harder to prepare for. So attacks that in the past took time and effort now can happen almost instantaneously. So just enough to have a few seconds of audio to fake your voice, a few media posts to build a fake identity and trick your staff. So in this respect, the two examples kind of stood out to me. One is when some HR teams are now ban cyber practices because they're too stressful for employees. So bad actors create so sophisticated attacks, and the example that was given is that when the victim was 10 hours on a phone call, multiple phone calls with multiple people, and the attack was actually successful. To prepare for this attack, you run training, right? So similarly as we do with phishing emails. So you click the link, and then the cyber IT department tells you, well, that was actually a phishing email. So to prepare for these attacks, you can no longer run similar exercises because HR just bans. It's too much stress for employees. And that's a turning point. Like at the time when AI threats escalate, we no longer have access to the tools that help our people to resist those attacks. The second example that stood out to me was the example with like chatbots. Typically what builds trust is that it gives you references. So you go, you read the references, and if it's true, the summaries or whatever you're asking for in chatbot is truthful with respect to the references, you can buy it. The problem is that when it was verified, 60% of the references were AI generated. So even checking the fact becomes a problem. So AI accelerating everything. It's it accelerates cyber threats. It accelerates pressure on financial institutions. And if we don't close this gap, then our resilience is going to be at stake here. So.
Well, thank you, Alexey. I just want to amplify a couple of things that you just, like all three of you mentioned. So for example, I think security awareness is significantly important, especially in today's world, because there's not necessarily that many tools to be able to prevent these sorts of AI-driven deepfakes and so on and so forth. At our company, we run deepfake phishing campaigns, and it's a blast.
For you.
For me. But I think what's been valuable from running these campaigns is, one, you're able to build these things so quickly, use the same tools that everybody else uses. Two, it allows people to get comfortable with identifying things and not getting freaked out about deepfakes, et cetera. Because now, generally people are, when they see a phishing email, they kind of sort of know, what to do. They push it to their junk folder or whatever and move on. But when it's a deepfake, there's a little bit more emotional attachment to it because it's either a video or it's something, or there's this notion of urgency to it. So essentially AI has made that mode of communication a little bit more emotional. And that's complicated. So it's important for people to be trained adequately so that they can identify things that they can look for as our technology matures in terms of identification. So that's one thing. And when we look at how that's helped us, for example, recently there's been, Salesforce and Sales Drift has had multiple issues with respect to deepfake and so on. Or, the call centers and so on are able to pick up on identification of these things just purely because of training. They never discount how much training can add value to these things. And the sharing component you just mentioned is spectacularly important. I'm the chair of the CCTX, and in the financial services community, all of us get together every 2 or 3 weeks to talk about these sorts of things. We share threats and telemetry that we see on a regular basis, because there is no competitive advantage in cybersecurity. Because if you have an account with a Sun Life, you probably have an account with a BMO or a RBC or somebody else. We're all part of the same financial system. So I think it's, I think collectively we've got to a point where I think it's really important for us to share this information and share it in a way that is useful to everybody else. And it's great that we're having these sorts of conversations to allow us to govern this ecosystem well as well. It's one more question. What's the next step in terms of thinking about the threats, risks, and opportunities in terms of AI? We'll start with you, Alexey.
Yeah. In my view, once we identify the risks, so the next step is to think about building practical defenses. Yes, the technology is evolving, and it's evolving very fast, but it doesn't mean that we should wait until it plateaus to start acting. No, that would not be an appropriate approach in this case. The technology evolves. We still don't know when it's going to plateau. We hear all these talks about AGI, about new threats that got discovered, basically daily. So, and the policies, the regulators, of course, need to adapt. And here I would like to split this to, we have the financial sector and we also have the oversight agencies. So you cannot equip and help promote AI in the financial sector and forget about the oversight agencies. Both need to adapt. And quite often in the conversations and talks, the theme comes up that, well, to deal with AI, you need AI. You need some help. And indeed, given the pace at which technology develops, sometimes regulators just cannot keep up. So adoption of AI should be in both in the financial sector and in the oversight agencies. And seeing this picture would be very interesting as in terms of the next steps. And of course, scenarios of what could happen, because AI is a general purpose technology. It is used in all sorts of activities. And of course, you never know where the risks can come from. So we see the geopolitics lens, we see the technical lens when AI is discussed. And all these scenarios should be on the table for us to be prepared. So that is a big value from the forum, as we say, because people come and people discuss it in an open manner. And this is, of course, very useful for us.
Matt?
Sure. So I'll to give you guys some time for questions. I'll keep my remarks brief. So I think next session, whatever form that takes, we just released E23, updated it to include a lot of elements around AI. And so, as you all know, OSFI is a principle-based regulator, so there aren't a lot of specific rules in there. So I think getting into some of that nitty-gritty as people become a little more comfortable with AI, as there's more use cases, I think that would be interesting to discuss. For me, thinking about the next big threat, two things come to mind. I mean, quantum certainly, as I've mentioned before, I think how that's going to accelerate things in the AI world will be interesting. And then as people start to use AI more and things become a little more autonomous, agentic AI starts to become more common, I think that will be an area to explore. How do we get our hands around that, and how do we make sure it's doing what we expect and there isn't something happening in the background that's providing attack vectors for folks that are out there trying to take advantage of the system.
Excellent. Gerard, keep your
Very,
comments
very-
brief,
yeah,
and there's some really
very-
interesting questions here that I want to get to.
Very quickly, I would say keep your eye out for the final report, as I said, early-ish in the new year. And then for me, I mentioned it already, but information sharing. I just think there's so much there.
Totally.
Would love to see that develop more.
Totally. So, I'd like to move on to, there's some very interesting questions here, so thank you for that. A lot more difficult than the ones I did ask. So I'll try to bucket, because there's so many of these and we have that much time. I'm trying to bucket these with respect to specific audiences. Matt, some are directed to you. I'm sure you're not surprised. And I'll ask you like 2 or 3 of these, and then you can sort of take them all together.
Sure.
I guess one of the questions is, how does OSFI utilize AI in the supervision of for fees today, and to review submissions and so on? And people would like to understand that. How does OSFI view cybersecurity? Do you view it as a competitive advantage, or do you view it as a community right for the safety and stability of the financial institutions? Right? And so maybe we'll take those 2 first, and then there's a few more for you anyway.
Sure. So how does OSFI use AI? So we do have AI in use for information that's publicly available. We have lots of restrictions around the data that you all share with us, and any time that we have probed that, there have been some issues, and in a test environment, we have used some protected B information, but it's closed off, and I mean, our primary concern is that we can go to the superintendent and say any information we're getting from our FIFAIs is locked down and safe and can never be exfiltrated. So that's a primary concern. So it becomes a little challenging for us to use things like AI for information that's that sensitive. For publicly available information, for example, quarterly and annual reports, they're a lot to read, and an AI can go through that in minutes and provide a supervisor a good summary. You still have to look through a little bit yourself, but I think condensing, especially language rather than numbers, is very helpful. We also use it to scan the risk environment out there on the Bloomy or wherever, and to sort of come up with things perhaps that we haven't noticed, but oftentimes it's just to aggregate information and sort of rank order certain risks that are out there, what's being talked about, what's being discussed. So we do use it, but more right now for publicly available information, and to sort of make ourselves more efficient and more effective. Is cybersecurity a competitive advantage? That is a great question. I would say there's probably a tipping point somewhere where, yes, if you have invested in the infrastructure, where you have really taken the time to try to make yourselves the best in this class, yes, I would say that that is something that can be a competitive advantage. I think at OSFI, our goal is to raise the bar across the board, so there's a baseline. And so if you're going to gain competitive advantage, well, everybody's got to start up here, not down here. And I think that's, as a regulator, that's the way we want to think about it. We can't just say, okay, may the best, bank or insurance company win, and the others will just, that's not the way we want to approach that. I think our goal is to raise the bar as high as we can, and then any competitive advantage you're going to gain is going to be above and beyond that.
That's very well said, because I think we share that sentiment. And Alexey, the next 2 are for you, is sort of fit well together. There's a question around, do you see the rise of things like stablecoin? Would it impact the resilience of Canadian financial institutions and the financial system at large? So that's one question. And maybe the other question that you can take as well is, how should model risk governance adapt to address sort of AI and AI-enabled models? Should we, as firms, look at standalone AI governance frameworks, or sort of integrated to existing models?
Thank you. I'll start with the second one. So both models are, of course, feasible, but the current most common approach across various jurisdictions at this point, we're not talking just about Canada, is to adapt existing controls and existing policies. So, of course, I believe it would be on a case-by-case basis. It depends in general. but that's the common take. So at this point, on majority of risks, we see that AI just amplifies the existing risks, as opposed to creating a whole reap of risk. There are certain risks that are really AI specific, but there are around just too many of them at this point. So for the second point, I didn't get it. Is it like the impact of stable coins and
Yeah,
AI
it's
on-
essentially, you know, rise of stable coins. Is it going to impact our resilience of our financial institutions and our financial system at large?
well,
Anybody can take that, take that,
well, let's
provide a
say-
perspective, but
That's a good question, and actually, it's one of like these facets, the cross-technology issues that Matt also mentioned when it comes to quantum. So quantum AI, blockchains and AI, stablecoins and AI. So at this point, we're fairly strong in this sense. In this, what I want to say is that it's something that we're monitoring closely, but no signs of systemic issues at this point. So it's no issues at this point when it comes to risks coming from technologies other than AI. It's when AI and blockchain and quantum could get together that would create certain issues that are a bit hard to anticipate. But the key thing is to, again, to keep monitoring. That's a typical advice, given all the reports that are coming out of different agencies, including Financial Stability Board, Bank of International Settlements, is we're at the stage where we need to keep monitoring. So the technology goes too fast at this point for us to say, we're done, we know the risks.
I'm hoping to be retired by then, but, you know, Matt, do you have a perspective on those two as well?
Sure. Well, for stablecoins, you know, my view is, and I think Prime Minister Carney, in his previous life, put out a very interesting paper when I believe he was at the FSB, and he basically said that stablecoins, it's just a bank. That's all a stablecoin is. They take in deposits, they put out an asset, and people go and spend that asset, but they hang on. So they hang on to the deposits, and some of these stablecoin companies are very profitable right now because I think a lot of folks that hold stablecoins, they don't expect an interest rate. They don't expect that kind of return, whereas they expect it from banks. So there's some dissociation that exists right now that I think will get squeezed out if the markets are going to be efficient. But is it a threat per se? I think it would be, I think, beneficial to Canada if we did have a framework for stable coins. Some folks, you know, and I would include myself in that, is we can accommodate stable coins right now in our current regulatory framework. It's not straightforward. It's not as simple as it could be. So maybe there's some updating that needs to be done there. But there have been some asks of us, and I'm sure there's more asks coming around stablecoins and stablecoin issuance within our Canadian system. Certainly, it's going to happen south of the border. That's the reality with the act that's just been passed down there. Folks are going to do that, and frankly, if you're going to issue a stablecoin, it's just one other way to gather deposits, frankly. And so I think you can't hide from the fact that it exists out there. I think the best thing that we can do on our side is to build the right framework for Canada and for Canadians, and to recognize what is going on in the rest of the world.
So, well said. Maybe Gerard, you can take this question. Sure. What advice would you give to boards of directors to appropriately monitor, govern the use and the pace of AI? What questions should they ask?
I think it's a huge challenge. One thing we haven't talked a lot about is the cost of all of this and the pace. And so I think one thing boards should be quite conscious of is what investments is the organization doing in this area. And, you know, it's a combination of, you know, make sure you're not spending too much, but probably pay more attention if you're not spending enough. And that's an area where, and this came up in our discussions as well, there may be a bit of a disparity between some of the smaller organizations and larger organizations, and frankly, even for regulators in the government as well. You know, some of our large financial institutions have lots of resources. I worked at BMO, so they have a lot of time and energy and Sun Life to invest. Some of the smaller institutions don't have as much, but they face a lot of the exact same threats. And the regulators as well in the government don't have unlimited funds to spend as some of the larger institutions do. So one thing I would say is, in addition to kind of the traditional, risk management that the board should be doing about, asking all the right questions. What are the emerging risks? What are the risks on the horizon? What risks do we face right now? What are the controls we have in place? To me, one of the things I think boards need to be really kind of in the weeds, maybe a bit more than they are in other areas, is around the spend and pace of development of these things. Because it's, I think it was one of the, I can't remember if it was one of the CROs who said earlier, you don't want to be last, right? You don't want to be the weak link. And I think, thinking about it from a bank perspective, that has always been the case. You don't want to be the one on the street who's invested least because you become the immediate target. And so to me, that would be paying attention to the spend, I think, is critically important because it's potentially a real issue.
It's a good point, and we did some board education on AI. We continue to do it, and we talked about cybersecurity threats from an AI perspective. But I also think what's been important for us is to talk about the framework that we've sort of put in place to be able to adequately govern, monitor, and so on, sort of our own experiments in AI, if I was to call it that. And I think it's good for them to appreciate the effort and the skill set that it takes to be able to actually do this properly. There's a couple other questions for OSFI, Matt. OSFI requires FIs to monitor unexpected behaviors in AI models and have contingency plans. Given that there's no precedence to manage this sort of risk, would you provide any guidance to attendees in this regard?
Sure. So, for a little while, I ran the financial risk division, and so model risk was underneath that. And I think one thing that we stressed was you build a model, you get it approved, you put it into production, and often when we go out, one of the weaknesses we find is the maintenance. Maintenance is not a priority. It takes effort, it takes resources, and it takes real diligence to do that. So I would say in this instance, I think like any other model, there's an element of maintenance, there's an element of monitoring outcomes and results, and just like any other model, there's models that are high impact, there's models that are low impact. You've got to have your own internal risk appetite sorted out, you've got to have that put in place formally, and you have to build a structure around your AI models that makes sense so that you can stay within your risk appetite and you can monitor and understand when and where you've got an issue that you've got to deal with. And you need to update your model, decommission a model, whatever it takes. I think a lot of AI models, and I've heard this, maybe it is getting better, but stability is always going to be an issue. And when you've got models that, as soon as they're built, they quickly start to deteriorate a little bit and then eventually start to deteriorate fast, I think the maintenance in AI models and the approach that you take to ongoing monitoring is even more important than for regular models, and your cycles need to be shorter. That would be, just off the cuff, some of the advice that I would give.
Curveball coming your way.
Okay.
That's all well and good for standard machine learning models.
Sure.
Most generative AI and agentic models are going to be commercially produced and being used.
Right.
Not many institutions are going to go build their own, right? So the question is, what type of advice would you give for those sorts of things? Because I can't really tune them. The processes that you would follow for traditional machine learning are a little difficult to apply directly.
No, I understand that. It's a valid point, and we have sort of guidance out there around third parties, guidance about reliance on certain technologies. And I mean, if somebody's giving you a black box and it is, you just can't crack it and it's difficult to monitor the output and it's a high impact, high use model, you've got to question whether this is the
and it should be part of your third party program to be able to ask these sorts of questions.
Absolutely. And so I think it's a tricky area when you get into complete reliance on a third party. And if you can't monitor output effectively, if your organization becomes overly reliant on one avenue, that can become problematic. I mean, it's you look at the cloud right now, and some would say there's a little bit of over-reliance on a few providers. Do we want to end up in the same position for AI? I don't think so, if at all possible. And now you've got to compete, I understand all of that, but at the same time, there's some care that needs to be taken around things like this. So I would
Absolutely.
emphasize maintenance, third party, yes, critical, and make sure that you've got a risk appetite that is clearly articulated and stay within that risk appetite.
Well, thank you all. I think we're running out of time and people are giving me various sorts of looks. There's so much more to this conversation. That's all we have time today. Well, let's give the panelists a big round of applause.